Taiwan may be the land of semiconductors, but the high-tech world also shares space with more traditional beliefs, including ghosts and ancestor worship. In this week's edition of Taiwan Talk, we speak with researcher Paul Katz at Academia Sinica's Institute of Modern History about his fascination for Taiwan's spirit world, how it began, and why he thinks it's not going away anytime soon.
Okay, I come from a family with a Jewish father and a Protestant mother, both of whom were agnostic. But I went to an Episcopalian boarding school, and I became very interested in religion from singing hymns and joining the choir. And I originally, when I went to Yale University, was going to study the Reformation. And then I took a course from a professor very famous named Jonathan Spence, who's published a lot of books. And his class was like 500 people every semester. And he talked about things like the White Lotus Rebellion and the Boxers and the Taiping Rebellion and things like that. And I became very interested in Chinese religion. And so in order to study Chinese religion, I need to learn Chinese. And in 1983, China, even though it was past the Cultural Revolution, wasn't very open. They didn't have very many language training programs. So that was the first time I came to Taiwan. The first time I came to Taiwan, I lived in a place called Guoji Shui, which is now part of the Da'an Senlin Gongyuan. And I studied at the Taipei Language Institute and taught English to bankers. And I spent most of my time in Da'anchu, which is pretty much a mainland area, so I didn't even know about Taiwanese religion. I didn't even know about Taiwanese. Most of our textbooks are all about Jianggong, Chiang Kai-shek and Fangong Fuguo and all these sort of things. And the only mentions of Taiwan were like Wu Feng and, the Aborigines and Alishan de Gunyang Mei Wu Xue and things like that.
Right.
So the second time it came to Taiwan was 1984 to 1985. I went to the Stanford Center at National Taiwan University, and then I started to meet Taiwanese students. And they started to take me to their homes in places like Lugang and Tainan, and I realized that there was a whole other culture that I was unaware of, full of temples, really interesting temples. And at the same time I was at the Stanford Center, there was also a professor there named David Jordan. David Jordan was one of the first anthropologists to do work in Taiwan in the 1960s. He published a book in 1972 called Gods, Ghosts, and Ancestors. And I did some legwork for him, and he took me down to a place called Xigang in Tainan to watch a Wangye, or a boat burning festival.
Oh, okay.
And so seeing all these spirit mediums bloodying themselves and these mammoth processions and the Taoists and the boat burnings, I decided that's what I wanted to study for graduate school.
Ghosts and boat burnings.
Yeah, go see boat burnings and things like that. So that became my thesis topic. So that's sort of how I became enamored with Taiwan and its religious culture.
Okay, let's broadly talk about your interest in religious culture broadly and ghosts specifically. Can you talk to that?
Well, I'm interested in ghosts because they reflect people's fears. But the really interesting thing about Taiwanese Wangye cults is they have a judicial side. In other words, these gods are underworld judges, and they reward the good and they punish the bad. And there's certain things in these processions which don't occur in module processions. For example, a lot of people wear paper kangs as a sign of penance. People will go into the temple and be ritually beaten by the temple attendants.
What do you mean by ritually beaten?
They hold a stick and they bring it close to your hand or to your butt, and they don't actually touch you, but you scream in pain.
Okay.
It's a penitential ritual.
Okay.
And the whole, then what the Taoists do is essentially another penitential ritual. In other words, they say, because disease is a result of sin. This is an idea in the West as well. It's divine punishment. So the reason that these ghosts are around is because bad things have happened and we're being punished for them. And one interesting thing is, they have these processions, right? And they have these ghost troops with the painted faces, yes. These things called bajiajiang and things like that. Or they'll stop in certain places and do rituals.
Uh-huh.
Where do they stop? They stop where there's been a car accident. They stop where there's been a suicide. They stop where someone had an unexpected death. So if you want to see every 3 years where a town's tragedies have happened, follow the procession.
Wow.
And so this whole every 3, 5, 12 years dealing with ghosts is also dealing with the idea of sin and affliction. So I call these rites of affliction. It's a term from an anthropologist called Victor Turner. And every 3 years, the community deals with its tragedy. And individual people deal with their sense of guilt and sin. You ask people, why are you wearing a kang? Because I'm sick. Why are you sick? Because I've done something wrong. Or they're doing it for their parents who've done something wrong. So the whole idea of guilt and sin and divine punishment is at the heart of these festivals.
What is the most fascinating festival you've ever witnessed or studied in Taiwan?
Well, the one down in Donggang in East Haven, I did that in 1988. I lived there for 6 months doing honest-to-goodness real field work, making a diary every day, doing interviews, drawing up tables and things like that. And what was interesting about that is because I got to, live there. I wasn't a journalist. I was a field worker. So I got to know all the people. I got to know all the temple committee members. I got to know the Taoists who do the rituals. I got to know the young men who dance in the processions, and the sort of ordinary citizens, the women, the young people. And you see that everybody has a different view of the festival. For the old men who run the temple, they're welcoming these what they call royal lords or wangye, sort of inspectors to inspect the area and make sure everybody's behaving well. For the Taoists, these are plague deities which we have to offer penitential rites to. For the young people in the procession, it's a chance to strut their stuff and prove how tough they are and stuff, and often lots of fights break out and stuff like that. For the spirit medium, it's a chance to prove how powerful they are and how they can take a certain amount of pain and draw blood without really suffering and things like that. And for ordinary people, they're just asking for their individual prayers to be answered. So it was a chance to see a multitude of perspectives on this festival. Again, the most fascinating thing is, these ideas of punishment, people wearing kangs, people being, you see this guy lying on the ground and these men dressed up as Qing Yamen runners holding a sack going, whoa, and coming down to the butt, and the guy is screaming.
And he's not really getting hit anyway,
of course
right?
Not.
Right.
Because he's feeling a sense of guilt and sin.
Wow.
And that's pretty powerful stuff.
What
and that explains, by the way, since, apart from COVID, there have been no major epidemics. We had SARS, but that was, it killed a few hundred people. COVID essentially took the lives of the elderly and the infirm. But, so these are plague gods, right? We don't have plagues. Why are they still being worshipped? They're being worshipped because they're judicial deities, and they come to inspect, they come to reward the good and punish the bad. And it's a chance for a community to reflect on its wrongs and for individuals to try to do penance for their individual wrongs.
Okay, so we're living in the 21st century. Technically speaking, we kind of know that plagues and illness are caused by medical reasons, by microbes, and how much of that is still relevant today?
Well, again, this is the whole point. So any self-respecting Taiwanese citizen who uses the internet, and they know for darn sure that COVID is not due to some ghost running around, but they do know that every 3 years they have to deal with the wrongs that have happened. There have been tragedies in their communities, or they've done things wrong. A lot of it has to do with individual feelings of guilt. Maybe I wasn't a filial son to my mother. Maybe when I was a daughter-in-law, I didn't treat my mother-in-law so well when she was ill and in the hospital and things like that. So what people are doing is not dealing with disease. That's the surface thing. They're dealing with guilt and sin. So the whole idea of rites of affliction, on the surface they're dealing with religious issues, but what they're really doing is dealing with social issues. And these social issues don't go away in the 21st century. People still have family tensions. They do things, they cheat, maybe they lie, they cheat on their taxes, whatever, And so this is their chance to publicly do penance, or privately do penance. But, every 3 years, it's a cleansing of the community.
Wow. Okay, so from let's move away from skeptic to kind of like believer. What is the scariest thing you've encountered? What is the most I can't explain this encounter you've had in Taiwan?
Well, the scariest thing was, when I was doing field work down in Donggang, my assistant and I, we would, work during the day, and then we would, in the evening, ride motorcycle. I learned how to ride a motorcycle. We didn't have helmets in those days or driver's licenses. If any policeman stopped me, I just spoke English to him. But at any rate, when we ride our motorcycle down to Linbian, have some seafood and beer, and then ride back home. And one night, riding back home, with my sister in the back, I suddenly had this urge to stop the motorcycle. And I stopped, and in front of me was an enormous hole. They were doing road repairs.
Wow.
And somehow, and that was the year I was doing my fieldwork. That was also the year that the birthday of the Wangye in the lunar calendar was the same day as my birthday in the solar calendar. And I was shaking all over because, I had no idea that I was supposed to stop, but I did. So obviously there was some sort of, numinous. So it wasn't like I was scared, but it was certainly a miraculous occurrence. In terms of being scared, I haven't encountered any ghosts or anything like that. Some mediums really beat themselves bloody. There are occasions when fights break out. You want to get the hell out of the way of those. But at any rate, ghosts represent the community's sense of, something is wrong. Why is this ghost coming? We must have done something wrong. We're guilty of something. So.
This is really fascinating. You grew up in a family of agnostics. Has your studies made you more, respectful, understanding?
Yeah. Well, my wife is a practicing Buddhist. Okay. So when she was pregnant with both our kids, we would chant scriptures together. We have an altar in our home. I believe that there are divine forces in this universe. It's not necessarily a man with a white beard or a dark-skinned guy sitting on a lotus flower, but there are definitely forces out there that we cannot comprehend. And, there are certain religious specialists who really have power. You see them do their rites, and there's something more than just simply dancing and chanting. They have some sort of spiritual power flowing through them. I can't explain it. That's not my job to explain it. I'm a historian, not a mystic, but I'm an ethnographer. I just try to study what they're doing and how they explain it and how the people around it explain it. But there's definitely, in my opinion, some sort of, I don't like to call it supernatural, but it's, because it's all natural. This world has forces that we do not comprehend. Some people have tried to, do medical measurements of spirit mediums and their heart rate or their brain patterns, and some people have really different brain patterns, but that's not my job. My job is simply to interpret the social and cultural side of things.
Do you think Taiwan, as a last question, I'm sorry, I'm really fine.
You can go more.
I want to use everything. This is why I'm like, I don't want to go more because I want to use everything. Do you feel that Taiwan is more spiritual than other places, or is it any, because, like I said, I lived in Hong Kong for many years, right? And I don't, do you feel that Taiwan is much more cognizant of that realm of spirituality than other Chinese
Definitely,
cultures?
because it hasn't suffered the oppression of, the Cultural Revolution. I'm not sure about Hong Kong. The thing about religion in Taiwan now is that it's an urban religion. 80-some% of the populace now live in cities. These village festivals we go to, they have a hard time staging them. There isn't enough manpower to they have to bring everybody back, or they have to hire outside troops. So what's really happening now is these various apartment temples, what they call shantan. You see them all over the place. Or individual spirit mediums online with a Facebook account or a Line account, So people are still, and so elder people still go to, there are temples, right? But who in their right mind would build a new temple in Taipei? Who would build a 2-story temple when you could build a 20-story apartment building, right? There are no new temples being built here. There's the Longshan Temple and the Bao'an Temple, and they're sort of historical monuments. They're popular. People go there. But what do people do otherwise? They find individual mediums. They go to their apartments, and they ask them for help. And if they don't like that one, they switch to another one. And so the real challenge now is sort of getting a sense of urban religion, which is individual oriented, because we're not in these tight knit communities anymore. I live in a community of 166 households. It's called Bifuli Sanzhuang. I'm on the management committee. The only time people really get together is for Pudu, and even then only get about half of them,
Right.
So but there is no real. It's not like in the past when everybody was in the same village with the same surname or from the same name. It's an individual thing. So there are all sorts of individual cults. There's even cults for homosexual people and things like that. And there are ghost cults for women who have had miscarriages or abortions. So religion has become a very individualistic sort of thing. So if you do a survey and ask people, do you believe in religion, you're going to get the answer no. If you ask, do you burn incense, then you're going to get a very high yes. Have you worshipped a deity? Have you been to an altar or something like that? So it's the whole idea of religion is sort of a Western. The term Chinese zongjiao it's a Western term that was translated into Japanese and then into Chinese. Religion here has become a much more individualistic thing. A lot of people do, also fortune telling and things like that. A lot of people go to temples and they throw blocks. They draw those divination sticks. So that's where it's really at. So people are very spiritual, but it's not in the same sense as Western churches or the traditional village temple. I'm not sure about Hong Kong. I would expect that Hong Kong there's still a lot of. I know in Hong Kong there's a lot of places called Dao Tang or Dao Tang where people do spirit writing and things like that. But I've seen them in Hong Kong. I've seen them in Macau. I'm not sure how prevalent they are, but religion in urban centers is not so visible. It's very private. These little apartments. And they have to shut up by 9:00 or the neighbors complain or they get fined and stuff like that.
You are listening to Academia Sinica researcher Paul Katz. I'm Hope Go. Thank you for tuning in.